Hey guys, welcome back to Podcast. We are the platform for young people to express their views on current issues. If you enjoy the show and want to get in touch with us, follow us on Instagram at Podcast. Also, if you could subscribe and review on iTunes, that would be lovely. Today we're going to be talking about capital punishment, analysing the question whether or not it can ever be justified as a means of punishment. And I'm joined by Finley and Colin as per. What is capital punishment? Well, it's kind of, I think a lot of people know what it is. It's basically the death penalty. So it's when a person commits a crime. It's normally a very serious crime, so something like murder. But in many countries, there's other things that you can be prosecuted that for. But I think a Western interpretation would be normally it's for murder, that you would be given the death penalty for, or treason, as well. So basically it's coming to the public eye recently, especially in terms of Britain, because we've had a little case. Basically, the Home Secretary Sajid Javid, he normally, when there's under the Extradition Act of 2003, will appeal if there is a British citizen being executed in another country, he will appeal it or seek assurances that the death penalty will not be used from the US. But in this recent case, in which there's former ISIS members, he hasn't done that because, well, it seems like the UK is taking a little bit more of a looser stance on capital punishment. In history, in modern history, it's been that, the UK have been against capital punishment, and that's been the case since 1965, really, when they abolished it for murder. In terms of the death penalty in general, 53 countries still officially have the death penalty, and in 2017, 23 countries used it, and it can be used in very, very different ways. So, for example, we've got the lethal injection, hanging, firing squad, electric chair. There's many different ways, and the US is our closest ally, and they have it, which is quite interesting, and it's one of the only big Western powers that still have it, death penalty, and they use it quite readily. There's 2,817 people on death row in the US in July 2017, and it's legal in 31 states. 23 people were executed in the US in 2017, but that number's dropping because that's the second lowest number since 1991. So there's different methods as well, like lethal injection, firing squad, but lethal injection is the primary method for all of the 31 states. What is the question around this? What do you guys think about the question around capital punishment?
Well, I think the question is really just whether it's an effective and moral aim of punishment, because it's difficult to tell, or I think there's definitely a debate as to whether it actually makes society a better place. And that's what the question is.
Also, I think it's quite an easy question for just a normal person. I don't think you need a lot of stats or facts or case studies, which we've got today, but I don't think you need that. It's mainly just basic morality is all you need to determine your stance on this, and all of us have stances. You'll see them as the thing goes on, but we're going to try and take approaches where we try and approach this question in an objective manner and in an impartial manner, and as if, say, you knew nothing about the topic in the first place. So I think the main arguments for capital punishment is the element of justice. So especially when we're talking about something like murder or killing someone, it's proportionality, and it is a proportionate punishment. If you kill someone, you get killed in return. It kind of seems fair. It's kind of justice, I guess. What do you guys think of that argument?
Yeah, well, obviously, it is in that sort of situation, murder. If someone murders, the only just punishment for that would be to execute them. But then, on the other side, you'd say that it seems quite barbaric, and it seems really hypocritical of the state to be punishing someone for murder, and then the way of punishing them is to murder them themselves. It seems really hypocritical, and it seems as if it seems kind of immoral from the state as well. It just makes them as evil as the actual
you're
criminal himself.
You're killing someone for killing someone, so it goes around in circles, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. But do you think the state has a different sort of morality in this issue, to the normal person system?
Legally, obviously they do. But I think if the state want to be morally, consistent and principled, I think they should, practice what they preach,
yeah.
and just not practice the death penalty for a myriad of reasons.
Okay, so I think we can agree it's a proportionate punishment, and proportion tends to be fair and justice. But I think the idea of like setting this precedence is quite damaging in many areas.
Well, one thing that I could say, if you use the example of Ian Brady, obviously it was seen as quite an evil man who killed
five
children?
5 kills, yeah.
And rape them as well.
Yeah, with Myra Hindley, and he died. Was it a couple of years ago?
2017.
Yeah, 2017. He died in prison, and it was quite a big outrage that he was like for him. Obviously, he seems like such a person that is very unlikely that he's going to be rehabilitated, and a lot of people wanted justice for these kids because he basically what he did as well is he hid them in the moors in Manchester, and basically some of them still haven't been found. Or I think there's one child that still hasn't been found, and
I think it's 2. I'm not sure 100%.
But yeah, a lot of especially people of Manchester, they really wanted justice for these murders. So, in those cases where you have such abhorrent, evil and heinous crimes, do you think the death penalty could be used for people that are just going to be sent that are you're never going to try and rehabilitate them and in order to bring justice? Do you think that they should be used?
Well, I'd say that in this case, especially in notorious killer cases, people want the death penalty not because they believe it's the only way of justice. They want the death penalty because they believe it's the most brutal, severe way, and because they have a genuine resentment, they're trying to give Ian Brady the worst possible life he could have had, right? And so I think in this sense, the death penalty is actually quite impractical because I think that if you're speaking in terms of compassion, the death penalty can even be more impassionate than a life sentence. Because I know if I was done up for something, I'd much rather just have it ended there and then than have it dragged out for my entire life and it run away in a cell. So I think for people who want the death penalty to induce maximum suffering, it's very ineffective.
But then, could you also say that when we're talking about the morality of the state, surely then the death penalty is a more moral punishment than life imprisonment? Because with life imprisonment, you can have all these jail violence, you can develop mental health issues. Rather, death penalty can be seen as a quick, sort of safe or not safe, but a quick exit. So would you say that actually it's a more moral form of punishment then?
I'd argue that it's not very quick. These people, they're not just killed the day after their sentence. They will go through decades of on death row with appeals going through. It's the idea of hope. They get the glimmer of hope, which is taken away from them. I think that's equally psychologically harming. I guess there's sort of negative externalities with prison, things like violence, things like that, which the state can't really account for in the punishment. But yeah, I think what Colin said about these people, death penalty being more compassionate, it is shown in real terms. Between 1993 and 2002, there was 75 criminals who volunteered for death in the USA. They did it willingly, they pled guilty, and they didn't appeal it at all. I think it just shows that for a lot of people who know that they're guilty, this is an easy way out.
And it's interesting to note that death penalty or capital punishment, I think it costs the average taxpayer more to put someone on death row than it does to just keep them in prison for life.
Yeah, that's true.
Because of the paperwork, all the legal process, to actually get one of these things going is a lot.
Yeah. Back on Nell's point where, but the thing is though, I don't think you can have it both ways. You can't say that the death penalty is more compassionate, but also say that it's less compassionate. So when you're saying, it actually is quite a long process. But then you're also saying but a lot of people volunteer for it, so surely that if people are volunteering for it, surely it shows that it's more moral, and you can't have it both ways. You can't say, oh yeah, it was good, but it's also bad at the same time.
I mean, it is in a bit of an eye of the beholder kind of thing, because it's some people, there probably is some people that would prefer just to live, even though they're living with no meaning and they're going to die in a cell, rather than be executed. But I think, I'd say the vast majority of people would rather have it end in a painless way. Yeah,
I think so too, just to clarify. I was just trying to challenge an argument. I'm very sorry. And on the cost thing, I think that's quite interesting. Basically, the death penalty costs taxpayers $90,000 more per year than a prisoner in the general population. But this raises we're talking about costs and things here. Should that ever trump the sort of idea of justice and morality? What comes more? The idea of,
I mean, in terms of cost, what we're speaking of is an argument of to what extent does the prisoner play a burden on the public, because ultimately the money that's keeping them in jail is being paid by the taxpayer. So it's is it worth paying £40,000 a year to keep Ian Brady in jail? Like, that could be going somewhere else. So in terms of that argument, I'd say I think it probably is worth it, because I think that the reason I can't get behind the death argument, right, is that it puts innocent lives at risk, and I think that just any system that has killed innocent lives and puts them at risk just cannot, like, go through with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree what you talk about as well. It's one of the main arguments against this sort of miscarriage of justice, which is like when, well, there's like an error in the justice system and someone
miscarriage
innocent,
in the justice
is punished. And like there's loads of case studies of that. There's Timothy Evans, who's in 1950 was falsely executed for killing his family when it was actually his landlord. And like obviously this kind of eradicates the proportionality, especially in this specific case, because what has Timothy Evans done to deserve to die? I mean, there's no justice there really. So like when you get cases like that, it kind of undermines the whole thing. We talked about the Me Too movement a few episodes ago, and it's like these bad eggs undermine the whole thing. I think that's definitely the case with capital punishment as well. But do you think those anomalies should really be taken into account, considering they're so rare?
Yeah, I think the thing is though with miscarriage of justice is like, you know, it's such a high price to pay for like a mistake, and I think the price is actually too high to pay. Like when you have an alternative with like a life imprisonment sentence instead of having like this where even though you can have a miscarriage of justice, it's not actually costing your life. I think I think there's these cases like Timothy Evans are just like too like high a price to pay for like society to have this.
I mean, if you put it in scale, if you put yourselves in the shoes of people that are actually innocent, like they've not done anything, they're completely innocent in this scenario, and they were being killed for something. If you just put yourself in those shoes, it's so hard to imagine like what having to deal with that, what having to come to terms with being executed by the state, that like this person might love the country, but by being executed by it because of something you didn't do, like it is a horrible thought. And I think even though the numbers may be like quite low in terms of innocent people dying, I still think the trade-off, I just think it's completely evil to just have that trade-off in the first place. Like, we should have no system that puts the innocent public in danger, because you can get punished for what you do, but with capital punishment, there's also an extent like you can get severely punished for what you don't do.
Yeah, I think the like obviously you can still be like punished like unjustly and go to prison,
Yeah.
but I think it's the extent of that punishment that comes along with capital punishment, which is why like these miscarriage of justice are really important and aren't just like anomalies which should be brushed aside.
Okay, but let's look at this, right? Well, a full life sentence, like Timothy Evans for killing his family, probably would have got a full life sentence. He would have died in prison anyway. Is that not equally an equal miscarriage of justice in the absence of a capital punishment system?
Well, no, what I mean is like, I think, well, there's obviously in that time that where he's in jail.
He was found innocent.
Yeah.
So he could have appealed his case.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, like, even though it's still wrong to imprison some innocent guy for 40 years of their life imprisonment is, like, to an extent, you can argue, like, whether it is really, but it can be reversed. Like, they can be released and they can, in theory, get back on their feet. But with capital punishment, once they're gone, they're gone. Like, no one cares about posthumous exoneration because, like, they're dead. Like, well done you. You figured it out about 20 years too late.
What, like, I think Timothy Evans was given a...
Posthumous pardon.
Yeah, posthumous pardon. And, like, that, it doesn't really make a difference in the end because, well, what that is basically where, is it where the state, you know, after he's died, they basically...
Remove him as crimes, basically.
Yeah.
And
They basically say, we're sorry, we made a mistake.
Yeah,
But it's like...
Which obviously is completely inadequate for, like, the sentence which was given to him. Like, it's nowhere near proportionate, like, what he should have been given. So...
Yeah, he was given a posthumous pardon in 1966. He would have been, I think he probably would have still been alive by that point. He would have been like in his 40s. So yeah, I think that's fair enough. But I think just there's probably cases where posthumous pardon like isn't really feasible. Like there's probably loads of death miscarriage of justice.
I just ask you guys, in an ideal world where every single capital punishment case is like correct, like the innocent are never killed, and it's a quick process so it doesn't cost the taxpayer much, would you support the death penalty?
Yeah, I would. Yeah,
I think it really depends on them. I think for me, I think it would only be for like incredibly heinous crimes and for incredibly severe crimes, because I think there's so many things, like so many factors which go into like people like murdering or people like committing these crimes, that I think it's actually it's always more complex. But yeah, I think I would support it definitely for the cases such as like where the person's not going to be rehabilitated. Where most of the time, if he's just going to spend his whole life in jail, like it's almost, you can argue that it's more compassionate as well. So I think I would support it.
We talk about these. We keep talking about people getting rehabilitated. Like Ian Brady, like could never get rehabilitated. But I think what I think is that some people just don't deserve like the chance to get rehabilitated. I don't think, as much of it as it may shock some people, that Ian Brady, after killing and raping 5 children, deserved a second chance at life. Like, I don't know if that's too harsh on my end. I just think that. I know if I was on the receiving end, like if my kid was on the receiving end of that, I would not want him a second chance at life. So
yeah, well, I mean, I think really the most important thing is like in those cases, like you have to think like what the public gonna feel, how safe the public gonna feel if you let these sort of people out after 30, 40 years in prison. Like it's just I think really it's like an injustice to society if you let these people out. So I think like. When such a heinous crime is committed, like I think capital punishment could be used.
So essentially, like the crux of this is that innocent people die, and we just can't have a system that allows that to happen.
Yeah, I would say so. I think it's like completely immoral for the government to have a system in place where innocent people are endangered.
Okay, let's talk about some of the other justifications for capital punishment. I think that's very interesting. I think for me that's the main rebuttal to capital punishment. In the miscarriage of justice argument, I think it's just huge stakes on the line there. But we mentioned on victims there. Do you think it gives them closure that they need? The victims of say someone getting murdered. Or
in the Ian Brady case, did Ian Brady help find some of the other children?
I think he helped. He gave away the location of one, but there's one that he died with, the location of that, and that is terrible for the family, of course.
Yeah, 'cause I think Ian Brady said, like, well, I don't know if he said, but it was said that he's doing this to like leave his mark. That like Ian's never going to leave like that family now because they're always going to be thinking about where that kid is. So that's like his way of taunting them even now he's dead. So, your question was that. Like, what was your question?
It was about justice for victims. Like, is that feasible with a...
I honestly, I think that the way our mindsets are built is that we believe that, like, killing the perpetrator is going to give us justice. But I think that when someone commits such a heinous crime, like, you're never going to have like a true sense of closure in your heart.
Yeah, it's never really like you can have like the criminal sentence to execution or by via lethal injection or whatever, but it's never gonna bring back your child or whatever. So it's never gonna ever bring like full closure.
Because if you think about it, when people get over crimes, it's not really whether they're dead or whether they're given a life sentence. It's how long the individual, like the victim, it's how long they take themselves to come to their own terms, like by going to therapy or just speaking to people. It's like on their terms. I think you can get over things, like maybe never have true sense of peace, but like you can get over things, like on your own terms, like regardless of whether they're killed or whether they're given a life sentence.
Do you think the justice for victims and closure? Do you think that should even be considered in an argument like that? Considering that, or do you think like the greater good is the most important right now? Because when we talk about the victims, that'll be like it won't be many people in relation to the grand scheme of things. So do you? If you were to sort of rank this justification, do you think it goes high or low or what?
Well, you could almost argue that like actually the whole societies are victims of like the crime because they feel unsafe. They also feel like hurt by this crime. So and I do definitely feel like the society's perception, society's opinion is important, which is like what sort of society would we live in if we didn't actually care for the opinion of like the public. But I think one of the problems probably which occurs is people will react really emotionally to start with, and obviously our emotions aren't always completely logical and rational. So although it should definitely be taken into consideration, it shouldn't be the be all and end all, I think.
In terms of like society feeling protected, I'd argue though that a life sentence, like no one's like, while Ian Brady is locked behind bars for life or he's dead, like he still can't be a threat while he's behind bars, I guess. You know what I mean? So I just don't think, I think when you're looking at this argument, the alternative is a life sentence. So I think you also need to consider that always when you're thinking about the death penalty, like the drawbacks of that as well. Because like a life sentence isn't like the perfect answer, and a lot of the time it just creates the same problems or solves the same problems as a lack of death penalty in itself. So yeah, we talked about this sort of protection of society sort of argument there briefly. But let's move on to like human rights. Okay, so like the article, I think it's 3 of the human rights. Basically, this is everyone has a right to life. This is like inalienable, like everyone. This is a universal, and that includes criminals, really. So do you think that this applies for criminals who have committed murder?
I think like the argument against that would be is when you violate that declaration or that right. So, for example, when you kill someone else, you're violating that right. You then lose that right for yourself. I think that's what a lot of people who support the death penalty would say and would argue in that case.
I guess so, but
I think things like human rights they can't be lost and they can't be gained. I think just like basic rights, regardless of what kind of human you are, you have them because that kind of sets everyone up on like this pedestal of like an equal playing field. And I think when you start to take away rights from people, that's when like things get dangerous. So.
But I guess you can apply that to anything. So like, even if we look at war, like you join a war knowing that like there's a possibility of you getting killed, and you know states wage war on the possibility like trying to kill people. Could you say the same argument in terms of just violence by the state?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Obviously, I think what someone who would support capital punishment would say is I think there's probably a difference between what they would say is there's a difference between murder and like killing people, and obviously that might sound really stupid or really like wrong at the moment, but basically what they might argue is like by actually killing someone. So for example, if you're fighting against ISIS or you're trying to kill people, or you're fighting against the Nazis, so you're killing people in order to try and like take away a brutal regime like the Nazis. There's a difference between that and actually just murdering someone like on the street or something like that. So yeah, I think that's how someone would support it. Obviously, I don't support the capital punishment myself. I was trying to play devil's advocate.
I think it's hard to make that assumption though, because
there's no
it blurs the line, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Like there's no real like white line where it crosses between being murder and killing for good. Like there's no
a great teacher once said that where do you draw the line? And
yeah, a wise man once said so. So yeah, I think obviously it's very dangerous. And yeah, Colin's point about taking away and gaining human rights is obviously like very valid.
Dangerous, slippery slope.
As a wise man once said again. Back to you now.
Okay, I will finish on sort of deterrence that capital punishment brings.
Cool.
So like it's kind of obvious, right? So if you're a criminal, well, say if you're a criminal and you see that you're going to get punished for something severely, you're probably not going to do that. It just applies for anything. So if the consequences are quite heavy, you're probably going to refrain from doing that. Do you think that argument stands?
Well, personally, I don't see much of a difference between like the deterrence value of the capital punishment and the deterrence value of life imprisonment, because overall they have the same sort of consequence. It's just one is prolonged and one is shorter. So I don't actually think there's like a huge deterrence and difference in deterrence between the two. And also a stat I remember when we did this topic was that the murder rate in states which have capital punishment are actually higher than the murder rates which don't. And I think
in the US, by the way.
In the US it is, sorry. And I think that shows that actually capital punishment it more creates sort of a society which is more normalised by this sort of this activity or these actions because the government and the state uses it.
I think it's quite interesting. I'll go over 2 case studies, right? So if you look at places like the United States, which Finlay just talked about, they have the death penalty in certain states, but yet America has like more people in prison than like Russia and China. So clearly, like having harsh punishments doesn't always correlate with having a low crime rate. But I'd also say if you're willing to push like what you give capital punishment and like harsh penalties for, like if you look at countries like Doha and you look at countries like Qatar, China, like they just dish out these death penalties like for like really minor, what we would consider quite minor things, and they're like the crime rates are basically like quite non-existent. So if you're willing to push it to the extent where people are basically living in a state of fear, because I remember when I go to these places, sometimes I feel a bit like just worried, just like, you know, watching like something on Potluck or on the internet or something, because I'm worried that maybe I'll get locked up for that, and you kind of feel like you're living in a state of fear. But at the same time, there's like very little crime, so it's kind of like a little bit of a paradox.
I think it is a balancing act. Like, I didn't actually know that, because that's very interesting actually, because you can either have one option, have very harsh punishment, there's no crime, and the other, but there's also a society in fear, or you could have lenient lax punishment, but there is crime. So
the thing is, even though there is crime in like somewhere like the UK, I still feel relatively safe, just like walking about, like going to town and things like that. I don't feel like in a state of danger.
But
so would you say you felt like safer in the UK, where there's probably a higher crime rate, or in these other places where there's a really low crime rate but there's really like...
I'd say I felt safer from like other people in Doha, but I just felt in a state of fear as in, am I doing something wrong? Like, could I get in trouble for this or that? I felt that was worse than what I feel here, which is maybe sometimes like when it's like really dark or something and I'm on my own, might be a bit afraid, but like, no, I'm not afraid in general when I'm here. So.
But I guess we live in quite a safe place. We live in Edinburgh. If you talk about London, is
I'm from Aberdeen.
Knife crime epidemic. I don't know if we were speaking to a teenager there, they'd feel as safe in a lot of parts of London or other places as well. I think that's something to consider. It's been very interesting, guys. I've enjoyed that conversation a lot. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you for listening, everybody. Subscribe and review on iTunes. That'd be lovely. Follow us on Instagram. Thank you very much, and I'll see you later.
See you later.